Okay, so we know that to handle the critical statement, we have to use try block, and inside that, if something goes wrong, it will execute the catch block. Otherwise, it will simply execute the remaining statements. Okay, that makes sense, right? Now, what I will do is I will try to print the exception as well. So that's why you can actually print the exception. So we are saying something went wrong. Let me just remove one dot from here so that we can save some space. And after this, I want to print the exception as well. I want to see the message, what it says. So to do that, what I will do is I will compile this code and run. You can see it says something went wrong. Okay, that because we are printing that. Apart from it, the message which you are printing here, which is E, it says arithmetic exception. Oh, okay. That means apart from exception, we also have arithmetic exception. Cool, that also makes sense. So just try to remember this point that apart from exception, there is one more class here which is called arithmetic exception. We'll see that in some time. Now what I will do is I will try to create some more exceptions here. One of it is this. If I create an array, let's say the array is of type integer and let's say nums, and I will say the size of this array is, let's say, 5. Now in this case, when you have a size 5, of course, by default, all the values are 0 of this nums, and you can fetch the values. Let's say at this point, I'm trying to print the value of nums of 0 or 1, let's say 1. Of course, it will be 0. Because the values are 0. And I will also try to print the nums of 5. Now see, when you say nums of 5, what value you will get? Now, first of all, the size of this array is 5. And then if you are saying you're trying to fetch 1, that means you're fetching basically second element. Because the index number starts with 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, so for the 5 elements, the index number ends at 4. And we are trying to get the value from 5. Okay, so basically we are going out of bound. Okay, so let's see what happens if we do that. First of all, I just want to make sure that I don't have this exception 0 here, or maybe let's keep it 0. I will say compile and run. Of course, we will get an error because the dividing number, which is I, is still 0. Let me just make it 2. See, the problem is the moment you get exception here, it will directly jump out of this try block. It will not even execute the remaining try statements, okay? And that's why we have not seen those outputs. Now what I will do is I will just try to compile this once again and run. This time, if you can see, we got a different exception. Yeah, it says something went wrong. That actually makes sense because it is executing the catch block. But look at the exception. The exception is array index out of bounds exception, which means the size of your array is limited and then you are trying to access the element outside it. And it says that. It says index 5 is out of bound for the length 5. Okay, makes sense. So basically, apart from arithmetic exception, we have array index out of bound exception as well. But I have only one issue. The issue is why we are printing something went wrong. See, you try to show the message to the user as well. And if you can see the problem is with the user. What if the value of I is coming from the user? What if the value of this 5 here, nums of 5 is also coming from the user? Now, user is not sure what is the problem here. It says something went wrong. You have to be very specific here. You have to say, hey, you cannot divide a number by 0. So user will know, okay, the values which I'm entering is actually wrong. I should not be entering a denominator which is 0. Okay. Or maybe you can say, you're trying to access the element outside the array. The user will know that, you have to be in your limit. I want to print a customized message here. So if I print here something like this, if I say cannot divide by 0, that looks like a good message. Okay, let's not print this E anymore. Let's only print cannot divide by 0 and let's see what happens. Okay, clear. And I will keep the same error. The error is still with the array, not with the denominator. But if you run this code, you can see it says cannot divide by 0. Now that's weird because I'm trying to fetch the value which is outside the limit and it says cannot divide by 0. That's wrong. The error makes sense when the value of I is 0, right? So if I compile this code and run, now this works. You can see it says cannot divide by 0. But then if the value of I is not 0, in that case as well, it is printing cannot divide by 0. It's because the moment you get the exception in try, it can be from this statement or this statement, it will execute the same catch block. And in the same catch block, we have the same message. See, what you can do is before printing, you can actually check if you can check the type of this E, is E arithmetic or is E array index out of bound? And then based on that, you can print a different message. That's one way. Or what you can do is you can ask your Java itself, hey Java, I want you to handle different exception. So you can be very specific here. Instead of saying exception, I can say it is arithmetic exception. Now I'm being very specific here. I'm saying I'm not talking about exception, I'm talking about arithmetic exception. When arithmetic exception arises, print this message. But what if there's an array index out of bound exception? Let's see if we are able to handle that. So if I compile this code now, okay, first of all, let me just make this I as 0 and let's see what happens. Again, I will compile and run. You can see it says cannot do by 0. That makes sense because we are able to handle the exception. And you can see we are printing by as well. That means we are handling the exception. But if you make this as 2, and if we try to compile this and run, oh, you can see that we are not printing by. There's an exception. You can see there's a cross symbol as well. It says array index out of bound exception. That means we are not handling it. Even if you mention that in the try block, if you don't have a catch block for it, that means you are not handling it. How do we handle that? So in that case, what you can do is you can write multiple catch block. So you can write catch here. And in this catch, you can mention array index out of bounds exception. That's right. We have to create one more catch block in which you'll be having a different type of exception. And here we can print stay in your limit. Again, I'm just trying to be witty here, but you can print an appropriate message, whatever you want to. Now, if you try to see what happens, if I compile this code once again and run, you can see it says stay in your limit. There's no abnormal exit of the code. It is executing everything. And this time it is executing the catch block, the second catch block, not the first one. But what if you make this 0? Then, and again, it goes in sequence. Okay, so in try block, it goes in sequence. It will first execute this statement, which may throw arithmetic exception. And if that works well, it will go for this one. This might throw an exception, which is array index out of bound exception. So let's see if that works. Compile and run. You can see it says cannot divide by 0. So you can basically have two different exceptions here. Now, what if there is another type of exception here which we are not sure about? You know, there are a lot of exception classes. It's not like we only have these two. In fact, in the next video, we'll try to understand some of the famous classes or famous exception classes. We'll try to work on that. But at this point, there are multiple exceptions and we are handling only two. You know, it's always a good idea to handle all the exception, but we are not sure what exception it can arise. So in that case, you know, to be on the safer side, at the end, you can handle something with exception. Now, exception handles everything. If you remember the concept of inheritance, where you have a parent class, child class, so exception is a parent class. It can handle all the exceptions. Okay. Now you can say something went wrong because even you are not sure what went wrong. So you can say something went wrong. Now, if there is some exception which you are not handling, in that case, it will execute this part. To give an example, let's say I create a string here, string str, and let's say the value of str is null as of now, and by default it will be null. And then here, what you're doing is you're trying to get the length of this string. So what you can do is you can print string str.length. Now, if you try to find a length on a null string, it will give you a different type of exception. First of all, I just want to remove this exception. I don't want exception on line number 13. I just want it to work so that it will execute this line, which will give you exception. And let's see what happens. If you say clear and compile and run, it says something went wrong. Now, what went wrong is because there's a new type of exception. In fact, here it's a good time to actually print E because it should print something, some exception, so that we'll understand. I'll try to print this. And you can see it says something went wrong because that's what we are doing here. And then it prints the exception, which is null pointer exception. Now, this is one more exception. Like this, we have a lot of exceptions. And we'll understand that in the next video. But then before that, we have one more thing. What should the sequence here? The sequence is whenever you have a child and parent, make sure that your parent is at the bottom. So you can see exception is a top class, right? Parent. Let me show you how it looks like. So if I go to arithmetic exception, now arithmetic exception is a class which extends runtime exception. So runtime exception is a parent class for arithmetic. But if I click on runtime exception, you can see it extends exception here. So exception is a parent of parent. And in fact, this exception actually extends throwable. So there's one more class called throwable, which is like the topmost class. And yeah, so that's how basically the hierarchy looks like. In fact, I will show that in the next video as well. But make sure that you have at the end. But if you try to keep this on top here, it will create an issue because the exception can handle everything, right? At this point, if you get the exception, it will try to search for a catch which can handle this exception. And it looks at exception by saying, hey, exception can handle everything, right? Then why we even need this too? And that's why it says, it says this exception cannot, it's unreachable. Can you see that message there? It is unreachable because everything is handled by this exception. So it's a practice or it's compulsion to have the parent class at the end. So in the next video, let's try to understand the hierarchy, how it looks like and stuff.